Hey team, welcome back to the show. Today it is Coach Andrea and I talking through why you might be glute or quad dominant and how to fix it. So this will be a really helpful episode if you are someone who feels like you're slaving away trying to build your glutes, but all that happens is your quads grow, or you only see your glutes grow, but you can't seem to get your quads to grow despite your best efforts, which I find is something that comes up quite often, like in consultation calls. People will mention like, man, my legs just get bigger, but my glutes never grow. I'm doing squats, lunges, etc. I'm doing all the right movements, or vice versa. Now, to clarify quickly, kind of what glute dominant or quad dominant really means. Basically, if we are someone who's glute dominant, just as I said, just as it sounds, you might be, hey, I'm doing squats, hack squats, whatever. I want my quads to grow, but it really just my glutes seem to grow. Or same would be true for quads. If we're more quad dominant, man, my quads tend to grow really, really easily, but I really struggle to grow my glutes. Anything you would add there?
We'll get into all of it, but really, it seems to be the case for most people, one way or the other. And a lot of that comes down to just kind of how you're built. Because you can have two different people do the same programming, and just because of how they distribute the tension, one person is gonna grow good quads, the other person's gonna grow good glutes, and kind of have a trouble with the opposite.
Absolutely. And I think that's important because it is more than just even like choosing the right exercises. That is an important part of it, but it's more than just like a split squat, for example, isn't going to universally be like the best movement to build glutes for everyone, right? It's going to very much depend on you. Not just even like, hey, we're doing exercise because it's a good movement for glutes or quads, but are we setting it up properly for you specifically? Which will again look different from person to person. Between me and Andrea, how we would set that up would be quite a bit different. So this will be a really fun one to get into. It is important to understand that like being quad dominant doesn't mean you never use your glutes, right? Your glutes have just never experienced any tension in your life. It just means they're not contributing as much as they could, and we're probably not getting the best outcome there in terms of muscle growth. So for
Do
you,
you
the
tend to
list,
be one way or the other?
I would say a little bit more glute actually,
Yeah, me too.
but I don't think like I'm would say really relatively balanced, but a little bit more glute and like a doctor for me it seems to be. Um, but definitely a bit more towards glute, but honestly it's not too, I would say as a whole relatively balanced, but I'm as a whole like my limbs, like my upper versus lower, pretty even. I don't have like any glaring, I don't know.
Just perfect.
No, I don't know about that except for my calves. We'll get into that a little bit more though when we talk through the limb lengths thing, because I think that would be an interesting conversation, even like me versus you, kind of what that's like. So again, like from the audience's perspective, if you want to build a balanced lower body, or you're struggling to do so, again, just one area grows, this will be quite helpful. Um, Anything for you before we get into it from personal updates, new things going on with you?
Food is still going up. I got more fats added in this week. Um, Sleep has been really good. Training has felt really good. Everything is feeling really smooth at this point.
Oh
So
yeah,
next week I'll get labs drawn, and then hopefully everything looks good there, and I'll be able to be like truly in a build phase. So I'm excited for that.
let's go. I'm excited for you. It's been a while.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a long while. Feels like it. What about
I think
you?
mine's basically the same.
Okay.
Sleep has been a lot better lately. Sleep has been very good. Training is feeling great, getting strong, progressing really quickly there. I've been really liking the lower volume approach. My food has stayed the same so far. Definitely still have like a decent amount of hunger most days, but nothing too crazy, nothing I can't deal with. But really just at the end of the day, like I feel good, really good in my training, feel well fueled, and I'm really happy with the progress. And I feel like I'm staying very lean. And it's
Yeah.
kind of interesting to like mess around with like, because I don't think I'm below like what's sustainable. I also think like the pictures that Kyle shares on his story make me look better than I actually look. But I'm definitely staying pretty lean, so I'm very happy with where we're at. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's cool to we're kind of in the same spot. Natalie's in like the complete opposite
Hmm.
phase of us, but it's been cool to see like all of us going through phases with three different coaches and like just how dramatically the plan is. But we all work hard at it, so we've all gotten
Yeah.
a pretty good result. But yeah, it's been fun. I'm excited to build.
Everyone does have a lot of different approaches. Yeah,
Very,
I'm really
yeah,
excited to build too, but it also, I mean, there's many roads that lead to Rome, right? They can all that's like every coach will have a bit different approach. And I do think that's why it's so important when you're seeing like content where basically all content is marketing. This podcast is marketing, right? And it's you want your system to be the best system. You want people to perceive it as such. But the reality is there are which is important to consider when you're on social media if you follow a lot of other coaches and you're working with a coach because I think it'd be easy to like, well, this person said that this is the most optimal, so why are we doing this? Where between the two of us, like, or between you, Natalie, and I, right? Like everyone's done incredible. We've all made great progress over the last few years. We've all had very, very different processes. Just I think important to consider. But
for sure. And you're always seeing people's like before and after on social media. And so it's very easy to look at them for like 6 to 12 months worth of progress and be like, oh my gosh, that works so well for them. And you're looking at yourself on a day to day. It's
yeah,
like, this is moving so slowly for me, but it's going so fast for that person. They must have the secret.
no, I think that is so important as well. Timelines. Even like how long has this person been doing this? I feel like I talked to a lot of coaches about this. Like again, like your photo shoot, I had a couple people bring this up, like, oh, but I'm not where Andrea was for her photo shoot. And I was like, dude, you haven't been doing this. Like Andrea's been training very well for so long. And you haven't been doing it nearly as long as she has either.
I thought about that this week that I've been training pretty well for like almost a decade. And I this week have gotten a couple compliments on like my arms or stuff like that. And that's literally never happened. Like I don't ever get asked if I lift or bodybuild or anything like that. And it's happened a couple times this week and it's with like a decades of work. So it's just a long
That's
progress.
that's a depressing way to start this whole podcast, honestly.
But I mean, but the point of that is like for somebody looking at my progress pictures that's commenting on that, it's like, oh wow, she went through one growth phase and like had a good result for the photo shoot, but really it's been a very long time of laying the groundwork for it.
Yeah. I would say, I mean, like over the last 5 years, your progress has been very impressive, but still 5 years is a long, like I think of like when we started working together to where you're at now, you've grown a ton, your physique has changed a ton, but 5 years is still a long period of time to be like investing in all this and doing things well. And I think that's, again, I think just like being realistic with the timelines and understanding like you can't just look at like Andrea's diet or just her build phase in her diet. You have to look at bigger picture than that because all that culminated in where she is now.
Imagine 5 years from now, you could be getting compliments on your calves and like people asking what you do for your calves.
I don't know if that's going to happen in 5 years. I'll say maybe 10 is what I'm hoping for. Anyways, before I get any more depressed, let's get into the episode. So, how to know if you're glute or quad dominant or if it's an issue. This is pretty self-explanatory. There will be visual signs typically where, hey, my glutes way out balance my quads, I have pancake butt, I just have a long back and my quads grow like crazy. That'll typically be your biggest tell. You could also potentially look into like the episode that it came out on Monday, just came out with Kyle Baxter would be a really good one to listen to here as far as like when we should or shouldn't pay that much attention to sensation. But especially on like movements, I mean, like on short overload movements like a glute bridge, we're not feeling our glutes as a problem. I would say this is more so like a setup issue than you're like so quad dominant that you can't do a glute bridge like that. That's not a very good example, honestly. But I would say more so like on your lengthen bias movement. So like your split squats, lunge variations, your squat variations. Specifically, those are going to be your biggest tell. Like if after every time you do those, it's like I'm never, not that we want to chase soreness, but especially if you struggle to grow an area, that area like being sore when it's not normally is a good sign that hey, it may have experienced some tension that it doesn't normally. Especially if we're like doing it, maybe it's like hey, I did split squats, but I shifted my execution. Suddenly my glutes are sore. Okay, that's a pretty good sign that we actually did drive more tension to them than they're used to. So
I tend to feel my glutes even in things like pendulum squats
I do
and
too
hack
a ton.
squats. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, I mean, and it's not like I'm not feeling it in my quads, but even with a super quad focused setup, if you're feeling your glutes, probably a little glute dominant and vice versa.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm definitely the same. Like pendulums are a big glute movement for me. My leg presses, big glute movement for me. Um, or rear foot elevated split squats, definitely.
Yeah.
Even if I try to set them up to be the most quad biased, my glutes are just wrecked afterwards. Um, but it is important to understand this could just be an effort thing, right? Sometimes you're not sore because we just don't train hard enough. But especially if the opposite tissue of what you're trying to train is what always ends up sore. Again, not that we want to chase soreness, but it's like, hey, I'm trying to build my quads here. My glutes are just destroyed once again after doing the split squats for this like 16th week in a row. Still not a lot going on in my quads. Okay, there might be something here to look into a little bit deeper. Anything else you would add as far as like signs we might be glute or quad dominant? Pretty self-explanatory, honestly.
Yeah, I really think that you've covered it.
Okay. So, how do we best train glutes? I think this is important. Specifically looking at like squat lunge variations because there are some movement patterns where and this is part of the exercise selection side of things. There are some movement patterns where as long as we're executing them reasonably well, one of these things is just going to have to be the predominant thing working. So if you're doing a leg extension, your glutes aren't going to be working no matter how glute dominant you are. Same thing for like a hip thrust or a glute bridge. There'll be a little bit of quad in there, but our glutes should predominantly be the thing that's moving it. Even like an RDL or a 45-degree hip extension, same things. But here, really specifically, like squat and lunge patterns. This is where a lot of times it is the most difficult for people to change. And that's so basically for us to train our glutes well in a squat or lunge pattern, for us to bias them a little bit more. Basically, what we would want is your hips are traveling backwards a bit more, typically a little bit more forward lean in the torso. And generally, like that knee, we don't want your knee driving way forward over the toe, right? Whereas, like, if we wanted to make a squat or a lunge more quad biased, we would want our torso to be a bit more upright. So we're not flexing at the hip as much. Basically, your glutes act on the hip, your quads act on the knee. Just think of it like that. So torso a bit more upright. We're not flexing the hip as much. Basically, like, so for example, if you're doing like a dumbbell squat, let's say a heel elevated dumbbell squat with your dumbbells by your sides. If you try to like stay really upright at the bottom of the hole, that sounds at the bottom of the rep, you'll notice that you'll kind of want to naturally push your hips back and lean forward a bit to move the weight up. That's just your body trying to get your glutes more involved because it'll make the movement a little bit easier. We'll be stronger there. We can use our glutes as well. So basically that would be the difference. Like if we were to do a split squat, for example, if you're trying to make this very quad biased, you would stay very upright. You might even like elevate your front heel, try to drive your knee way forward over your toe. Whereas if we wanted to make this more glute biased, we would probably like try to keep our shin relatively, the front shin, like very upright. And it would look more like you were almost like, I wouldn't try to like hinge back too hard, but basically it would look more like your hips were moving backwards and your knee was moving forwards and you would be leaned forward a bit more. I think all that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. In the bottom of the movement, I always think of this as we want almost a right angle for a glute focus. So like a leg press, we're not moving at the hips, but if we're looking at the knees or the feet relative to the hips at the bottom of the movement where the muscle is fully stretched, you're going to get more glute stretch, so lengthening, with the knees being at a more open angle, so about 90 degrees. And for the quads, to get the quads more stretched, you want your butt kind of traveling toward your heels or your heels kind of traveling towards your butt, whichever movement you're in. And that is more of a closed angle. So hamstring touching the calf if possible at the bottom.
And that'll typically mean you're kind of driving your knees forward over your
Mm-hmm.
toes as well. Okay, that's a really good way to put it. So, why are some people glute dominant or quad dominant? Now, first, there are a lot of anatomical variables that go into this, but we need to understand a few concepts. Line of force, center of mass, moment arms. We'll see how this goes spoken. Okay, so imagine you are doing a barbell back squat. So we're just free squatting, barbell back squat on our back. Here, if you try to stand too far upright, you're just going to fall over backwards. If you try to lean forward too much, you're just going to fall over forwards. So basically, what your body does when you're doing something, a free weight movement like a back squat, really all free weight movements, your body will naturally put you in a position where the barbell in this case is right over basically right over center of mass, which is basically where you'll be the most balanced.
Like over
So
your shoelaces is how I was
exactly.
thinking of it.
Typically with a back squat, it's like if you think of gravity pushing down through that barbell, gravity is basically pushing that barbell straight down, excuse me. So this is what we call the line of force. Basically, imagine you draw a line straight down through the barbell through the floor, which is gravity pushing down through it. That is the line of force. Typically, for us to be balanced, that is like in a squat pattern, be it a back squat, a front squat, whatever. That is why the barbell is right over midfoot. Because if we were just like trying to artificially we were like force ourselves to just stand upright, and you were like trying to like squat where you had like your torso was perfectly upright and you had like a 90-degree angle between your shin and your thigh, you would just fall over backwards, right? We couldn't actually do that with a free weight. So your body will naturally kind of pull us to where we are most balanced. Now, as we lower and raise the weight, our body naturally does things like it'll lean forward and push your hips back, or it'll drive your knees forward to stay balanced. So understanding this, what a squat pattern looks like will vary a lot depending on your anatomy. So if someone has a short torso and long legs, again, understanding, and we're both versus like someone with a long torso and short legs, they're both doing a barbell back squat. They could even be like the exact same height, but how that movement actually looks will look quite a lot different. So if you envision that person with like long legs and a short torso, basically they are going to have to lean forward quite a lot more to avoid falling over. Because again, especially if we have like very long, we have like a very long femur, so like your thigh bone is extremely long, so it's kind of pushing your hips further back. Otherwise, we just turn into that example I just used where we're like kind of like pretty upright, but have a 90-degree angle between our shins and our thighs. We just fall over backwards. So that person has to lean forwards more with their torso to stay balanced. It would be the opposite for that person. Typically, there are a lot more variables in this, but that person with like short legs, long torso, they would typically be someone who would have to stay a good bit more upright to prevent falling over. Now, this in turn impacts something called a moment arm. So we have line of force, again, gravity pushing straight out through the barbell, and moment arm. So this basically determines where the greatest resistance is. So basically think of the moment arm in this instance as, we can think of it as the horizontal distance between the line of force, gravity pushing straight out through the weight, and whatever joints are being used in this movement. So in a squat pattern, we have the knee joint and the hip joint. So easy way to think about, okay, which of these muscles is experiencing the greatest resistance and working the hardest is basically which has the longer lever arm, right? Like which is the longer lever here, or which has the greater distance between this line of force. So again, this like line going straight up from your shoelaces to the barbell. Are your knees further from that, or are your hips further from that? So for that person who has to lean forward because their hips are naturally like pushed further back into the squat more, it might be like, man, that line of force almost goes like right through their knees. Like if you're someone where when you squat, you have to lean way forward and you basically have like your shins are very upright. They're basically perfectly upright and you have like that 90-degree angle in between your shins and your thighs at the bottom of the rep, your knees aren't able to travel way forward over your toes. It's almost like, again, that line of force is like right through your knees. So there's like no distance between that and your knees, but there's a huge distance between that and your hips. You will be a lot more glute dominant when you do like a squat. Your lunges will typically play out pretty similar. Whereas the opposite would be true for that person who has to stay very upright unless they drive their knees way, way forward. So that person would be typically a lot more quad dominant, whereas the first we talked about would be a lot more glute dominant. And the greater this is exaggerated, the harder it will be for us to, or the more intentional you'll probably have to be in like a squat or a lunge pattern to bias the opposing tissue, quads or glutes, whatever you're struggling to grow. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, it does. And
Anything
this
you would
is
add?
why, yeah, this is why, and I know we'll get into a lot of this in part two, but this is why being able to utilize certain machines is such a game changer for a lot of people with shorter tibias and longer femurs, or who tend to be really glute dominant, and vice versa too. But this makes me think of it because of myself. Whenever you're trying to do your quad work with dumbbells and barbells, and then you are able to use something like a hack squat, so the line of force is kind of fixed for you, you can put yourself into that position where, because that line of force is fixed, you can get your knees forward over your toes without falling. So that's the reason why that can make such a big difference for people. And we can also like make adjustments with things like heel lifts and use a hand support and different variations of split squats and things like that to get around this with fewer pieces of equipment. But it is something that that's why certain machines can be so helpful.
Absolutely. I would say, especially for quads, a lot of times if someone is struggling to build their glutes, it is just a matter of we don't necessarily understand how to train glutes well. Now, you might naturally be more quad dominant, but it is typically pretty easy to set that up to where, okay, when we split squat, we need to move our foot further forward, right? Or we need to basically change our foot placement and change our intention a bit. We're not RDLing well. We don't understand like how to do our hip thrusts well. Typically that is a matter of like, hey, we just need to be okay with moving our pelvis a little bit further backwards. Whereas, again, for our quads, it is, hey, your pelvis really wants to move backwards whenever we squat or lunge, and it's like very unnatural for us not to. And it doesn't even make sense if we're using free weight movements for your body to let your pelvis like move further forward because we're less stable, right? So when we don't have something like a hack squat, as you said, with a hack squat, your pelvis can't move backwards. It forces you to drive your knees forward over your toes. But because it is very stable, we're not going to like fall over forwards like we would if we just like try to stay super upright with a barbell back squat. Now there are things like, yes, our heel elevation we can use to work around it. But it is like for quads, that is where like more stability, like better machine options are, I would say, a lot more helpful than for glutes. It's less about like, oh, let's just get you on this machine and it's going to change the game for you. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
This is probably also where the debates between people like, oh, just barbell back squat and that's going to create the best growth versus people who are like getting under a Smith machine to squat. It's probably that the people who just can get under a barbell and back squat are like, why would you need to use a Smith machine? Just do it. It's hardcore, like sort of thing, where those people that get under a barbell and look like me, where my hips shoot backward and it becomes a very hip dominant movement where people will say like you're just putting your low backs into it.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for me. Or like Lane Norton is kind of the
That's who I was
example.
just thinking
Yeah.
of. Yeah.
People will tell him that he's not doing it right because he's leaning forward. Well, he's just got longer femurs relative to his tibias, and if he didn't, he would fall over.
So let's talk about that a little bit, the tibia versus femur length, because this is important as well. So your tibia is your shin bone. Your femur is your thigh bone. So if you were someone who had shorter shins relative to your thigh bone, short tibia relative to your femurs, Typically here, what we would see, there are some other variables here, but typically what we would see is because your femurs are longer, you are going to basically have to displace your hips. Basically, you're going to have to push your hips further back. They're going to naturally kind of be like, as we squat down, they're just naturally going to be set a little bit further back. But also, we would have to, like, for us to stay, is that right? I'm suddenly second guessing my own thoughts now on this. Because we would have to have more, because we're naturally going to typically see like a little bit more, we're also going to have to get a little bit more knee flexion, however, to like stay balanced because our tibia are so long. Now I'm going back and forth on this with myself.
I don't know, you have me confused too. So if you have shorter tibias and longer femurs relative to each other, then you're going to be more glute dominant because your hips have to come backward more. Whereas if you have longer tibias, shorter femurs relative to each other, then you're going to be more quad biased. So that's why something like a heel lift can be really helpful for keeping you more upright because it's simulating longer tibias, longer shin bone.
Exactly. I don't know why I was confusing myself with that. I was thinking about, okay, but if our tibia naturally is gonna, our longer femurs are naturally gonna put our hips further backward, then to prevent us from like falling over backwards, we're also gonna have to get more knee flexion to prevent. But no, yes, we're correct here. So yeah, basically shorter shins, longer thighs, thigh bone, hips are gonna be pushed back further, gonna be more glute dominant. Whereas longer shins versus our thigh, naturally, like our shins are going to be able to travel further forward. Our knee bones are basically going to be able to go further forward. So we'll naturally be a little bit more quad dominant. And then we also kind of talked about how we have upper body length versus lower body, right? If you have like as a whole, and again, this does tie into the like tibia versus femur thing as well. So this isn't as set in stone as like the tibia versus femur thing. But if you're as a whole, like, hey, I have like a really long upper body, I'm like, and short legs, we talked about like typically going to be someone who is a little bit more upright and going to be more quad biased versus long legs, shorter torso, going to be a little bit more glute biased. Would you say you're like pretty long legs, shorter torso?
Uh, I don't think so. I think I have a relatively long torso,
Mm-hmm.
but like shorter tibias, I think. I actually it's hard for me to know because I am tall, but then like next to my sister, her hip bones sit like an inch or more higher than mine.
That's weird.
Yeah. So it's all relative. But I am a
Okay.
very hip dominant squatter.
Okay. Okay. So another variable here is ankle mobility. Now, your ankle mobility basically impacts your ability to drive your knee forward over the toe. So if you were someone who had poor ankle mobility, basically, as we're squatting, there are a couple of ways we can lower the weight. We can drive our knees forward, we can push our hips backwards, or we can like round our back, but that's not the goal. So basically think we can push our hips back or we can drive our knees forward in order to lower the weight from the top of the rep to the bottom of the rep. Now, if you have poor ankle mobility, we will run out of range of motion. Basically, we'll run out of the ability to continue to drive your knees forward. Thus, to continue getting lower, we will have to push our hips further back and lean forward more. So when we struggle to build quads, a lot of times you will hear people say ankle mobility is the culprit. But honestly, I think that a lot of times this is just confused with the person not having the right limb lengths and just trying to force their body into a position that doesn't make sense. I think that, again, people don't understand like the anatomical variables here. So like it'll be, hey, just try to squat more upright, right? Or like I've talked to a good amount of coaches about this, especially when we did the mentorship stuff where you're like, well, this client, like I just keep telling them to squat more upright and they can't, is that their ankle mobility is a problem. And you look at them and it's like, no, the bar is right over like where it should be for like it's like basically this makes perfect sense. It's just look at how the person is built, right? It's just naturally they're not set up to be able to drive their knees further forward over their toes. So a lot of times it is again less about ankle mobility. I don't really actually find like, do you have any clients where you have to spend a ton of time working on ankle mobility? I don't find it's the problem that people seem to make it out to be. Again, I think it's more so just a misunderstanding of everything we talked about before.
Yeah, see, like if somebody can't get deep into hack squat, for example, it might look like ankle mobility, but it's more common that the issue is just that they're kind of weak in that bottom position. And really, like, as long as we get stronger there, that
Hmm.
problem seems to solve itself.
Yeah. Or even like their setup, like the person just has like the
Yeah.
angle of the foot plate way too high. So it would make sense that we would run on ankle mobility before we could like hit our target depth here. I don't find that it's actually like ankle mobility specifically. It's I could count on like one hand in all my years of coaching the times I've actually like had to work on ankle mobility with the client. Another problem can just be inability to access certain positions. So again, we talked about this on the podcast with Kyle. That he used an example of someone whose glutes are always short and contracted because they're weak. Thus, their body just kind of won't allow them to achieve that like fully lengthened glute position. Or someone has issues getting into like a fully stretched, like the bottom of a squat. You said maybe they're just weak there. Maybe they have the knee pain there. Maybe they have knee pain there because they're weak. A
Hmm.
lot of times this also comes down to like the foot pressure thing we talked about on that podcast a lot as well. Like people often have foot pressure because they're losing heel contact, and that's a whole nother deep dive. Um, but that can for growing quads again, if it's like I have knee pain or I just really have trouble accessing the position, cool. There's things that we can work on there. Um, Really oftentimes just fixed with smarter training. So again, like with a hack squat example of like us being able to get to like a fully lengthened quad. Sometimes it's like people are just trying to push the loading too much. We don't understand the setup. There's not enough tension and control as we lower the weight. I know we were talking about on our team call. Was it you or Natalie who was talking about like using a front foot elevated split squat for someone who had trouble like fully extending their hips?
Oh, that was me. Well, it was both of us.
If you want to take credit for it, can you kind of explain that? Like we were talking about how if someone can't get to the top of the glute bridge, like a front foot elevated split squat could be a good tool. Can you explain that?
Yeah, that's something that I've been using with a lot of my clients, but I won't take the credit for that because that was Natalie that was helping me through it. That's why we were both talking through it. But basically, if you will use something like a front foot elevated split squat with dumbbells and not have that fixed bar path like you would with a Smith machine, then it a little bit more evenly distributes the weight and we can kind of get them practicing moving into full hip extension with that back leg, because at the top of it, the front leg isn't going to be fully extended before the back leg maxes out range of motion and we get that fully lengthened hip flexor and shortened glute on that back leg side.
Perfect example where we could use things like that to allow people to better access these positions. Or again, like we talked about on the podcast with Kyle, like with that, the person can't fully get into the hinge. If we did like an adductor, like hopping on the adductor machine before an RDL, that'll force the glutes to relax a bit more. Be able to get into a little bit more of a lengthened range. Another challenge here can just be learned movement patterns. So be this from sports, running, past injuries. Something else I see quite commonly is a lot of CrossFitters or former CrossFitters are usually great at training quads, have oftentimes very well developed quads, but are a lot worse at training glutes, even though they're not necessarily built anatomically to be more quad dominant. And it's oftentimes more just poor exercise setup and technique. So a lot of times in those cases, like what I found is that person has typically done a lot of like front squats and
Yeah.
pushing heavier front squats, doing a lot more squatting patterns where they are more upright. Maybe they were wearing lifters, just spending a lot more time there. Whereas there wasn't ever a lot of time focused on like, and then maybe when we did deadlifts, it was like deadlifts for time, or I'm just moving the weight from point A to point B. And like with that hinge specifically, like when we do now, your glutes are still going to be involved in the front squat, but when you do something like a front squat, like still your quads are going to be, even if we're doing this for time, if we're squatting quite upright. And again, this I don't know if it's just like a coaching thing, a setup thing, but I find it to be extremely common for that individual. Quads are going to do the most of the work. Whereas like we're just hinging for time. We can just like bounce that off the floor. Basically, we can like doing deadlifts for time or deadlifts for as many reps as we can in whatever time frame. We can basically just distribute the tension to a lot of other areas without really challenging the glutes as well. So a lot of times, like we were talking on our last call about, like for this individual, we don't have to teach you how to squat. You can squat well for quads, but for us to learn how to like hinge for glutes and not just rush through this for us to like control the rep at the bottom, for us to not go through excessive range of motion, it takes a lot of time to learn. So that person might have like overdeveloped quads versus glutes, but it's not because they're actually like set up poorly to build glutes. It's more so just a trained thing. Anything you would add there?
Yeah, I hadn't really even thought about that from that angle with the CrossFitters, but that makes so much sense. And then, the something like an RDL is a lengthened overload position, but if you're bouncing that from the floor and taking tension away from the bottom position, you just kind of completely skip that part of
Yeah.
it.
That's what I find with a lot of clients, because I do have a good amount of clients coming from the background. They crush it. They always know how to work so hard, which I love. The RDL specifically is always one where it's like, hey, we're speeding through this. We're bouncing, like, even if it's not like bouncing from the floor, there's still like the stretch reflex at the bottom where there's like no control at the bottom. And we're
Hmm.
kind of just throwing the weight back up and almost like thrusting through at the top. There's like a lot of times a lot that needs to be worked on there. Body fat storage could be another variable here. Now, this is more so just people's perception of their glute or quad dominant than if they actually are. Some women, especially, will have a tendency to hold like more body fat in their glutes. Just looks like you have bigger glutes than you do. And then when we get leaner, we find that might not be the case. Or same thing could be true for the thighs, right? It's very common to hear like, my thighs are already so big, I don't want to like grow my quads anymore because they're already there. And then when we like actually get leaner, it's like, hey, we don't have any quads. Like we probably need to work on this. But
That
I
was
think it
me.
is really,
Oh yeah, the picture that Brittany put up, that's on my feed as well from yesterday.
yeah,
So Wednesday, my legs were just so skinny. But before I dieted, it looked like I had a decent bit of quad tissue just because that's where I hold more body fat. So,
it's interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
you've built I never thought your legs were skinny back then, but you have built a lot of muscle in your lower body
When
since
you look
then.
at that picture though, my legs were very skinny. And that's the case for a lot of women, and like you said, sometimes it's in the glutes too. I've seen that quite a bit. Um where somebody doesn't really want to build more glute tissue because like their pants are going to fit tighter or something like that. Where really like if we get lean, it gives us a very clear picture of where muscular development actually is.
Yeah. I find that it's quite rare that someone actually has quads that are really like already super well developed though once we get lean. I find a lot of times it's more similar like the picture you were referencing where it's like, man, there's just not actually a lot there once we get lean. Where just it's easy to mistake body fat for muscle tissue. Next up, equipment availability. We already kind of talked through this where if you're someone's more quad dominant trying to build glutes, we can usually just change intention and execution and get there. If someone's more glute dominant trying to build quads, again, it's definitely possible without them, but machines will help a lot more. If we can have something to prevent the pelvis from traveling backwards and kind of force the knees to travel forward and just get a greater moment arm at the knee. And then exercise selection kind of goes hand in hand with this. Are we actually just choosing movements that'll put us in a position to drive tension to the target tissue? So again, like the example of if we're naturally glute dominant, hey, us like if you're someone who's naturally a lot more glute dominant, that's gonna come out when you squat. You just like doing more barbell squats probably isn't gonna get us there. Heel elevated squat might start to get us closer. Even though like in that instance, like if we can move away from things where your pelvis isn't stabilized to where it is, we'll get a lot better outcomes still typically. But again, we won't always have that option. I'm going to use my client Carrie as an example of this in the next part of the series because she's someone who she is training at home. We have very limited equipment. Made a ton of progress on our quads in just a couple months actually, but it has taken like basically just really dramatic heel elevation for her. But we'll talk through that in the next episode. And really in the next episode, we're going to get into a lot more. This has kind of been a primer on, okay, why might we be more glute or quad dominant and just understanding that more and not just like, I need to work on my mobility, but basically the things you might have working against you so we can take a smarter approach when we are addressing this. And then next episode will be a deep dive into the best movements, training cues, and secrets we've learned for building quads if you're glute dominant or vice versa. There'll be a ton of applicable takeaways for your training to help you get better results there. Any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, I hope that this was helpful. This is something that's such a common question and problem for,
Hmm.
and we always want to build the opposite of what we're naturally like, what we naturally have. So
For
hopefully
sure.
this was helpful. And next week will be more like the practical, what you can
Yeah.
immediately take away.
I think understanding it, understanding the why behind it is so important.
Yeah.
But next week, then there will be a ton as far as your programming. So hopefully this was insightful. If you enjoy the show, do us a huge favor. Leave us a 5-star rating and review. If you would like to apply for coaching, hit the link in our show notes, and we will catch you guys next time.